Aloka Sen. We are also very happy to invite our special invitees, students of the art, history, and architecture, members of Craft Council, and dear friends. We are proud to be able to create a resource center in our council with a small library and a craft gallery. We want to encourage design students and researchers to interact with the craft people, making use of facility as a platform. Programs at the Resource Center will help craftsmen in design development and understanding the market trends. We hope to have regular talks and discussions with professionals at this center. Over the years, the Craft Council has successfully ventured into design interventions such as Banjara needlecraft, leather puppetry, Varangal daris, Nirmal toys, and natural dyes. We are very glad to begin our lecture today by such eminent historians present here. Thank you so much again, Dr. Ahuja, Visalatchi, and Dr. Sen for gracing us with your presence today. Now I request Sri Yashwant Ramamurthy, an admired architect of our city, and members of he is also a member. Please make the introduction of the speakers of today.
Nandini, and good morning to everyone. It gives me immense pleasure to introduce this morning's distinguished resource person, Dr. Naman Ahuja. He is an art historian and curator based in New Delhi. He is professor of Indian art and architecture at Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, where his research and graduate teaching focus on Indian iconography and sculpture, temple architecture, and Sultanate period painting. He is also the editor of Marg, India's leading quarterly magazine and journal of the arts. Professor Ahuja received his PhD in art and archaeology from the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London in the year 2001. Professor Ahuja has been tutor at the SOAS Christie's Asian Art Course, the SOAS MA Course in Religion, Fine Arts and Decorative Arts of South Asia, and the British Museum's Diploma in Asian Art. He has held visiting professorships and fellowships at the University of Zurich, the Ashmolean Museum at the University of Oxford, the University of Alberta, and the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library at Delhi. His research and graduate teaching covers a diverse range of subjects, including periods of artistic exchange in pre-modern societies like ancient Gandhara. Today, his presentation on Phanigiri visits an ancient Buddhist site in Telangana. Please welcome Dr. Ahuja to the Craft Council of Telangana with a round of applause. Thank you.
Your warm hospitality. It's been a real pleasure to come to Hyderabad to be able to talk about something that I came to this city to explore over many years. It's Phanigiri, which is this site over here in Telangana, is one of the most important ancient Buddhist sites in India. The exceptional quality of the to be contextualized within this jewel of a little monastery that sits on top of a hill. The hill is really one of many fantastic rock granite formations, granite massifs that you have in Hyderabad that carry on geologically into the rest of Telangana. The interesting thing with this site is that it is not a classic Satvahana site. It is a late site, and it shares space. It comes up at a time when there were many other sites that were active that had come up at the same time. So it's not an isolated site, but it has inscriptions and it has material which is quite revealing about the nature of society at that time. And it tells us something about a complex range of aesthetic concerns, social concerns, as Buddhism was beginning to compete for space with a rising amount of Brahmanical sites that were also emerging in the region. And this makes it a very exciting site for us to zero in on, because it has information that will show a fantastically how a competitive environment is also leading to a shared history. Both things are happening. And so that's something that I will try and touch on in today's talk. I had the privilege to first visit the stupas of Andhra and Telangana in the mid-1990s as a doctoral student, and then in 2001 I came to the stupas and museums of this region again with another colleague of mine, Akira Shimada, who had been a colleague when we were both postdoctoral fellows at the British Museum in 2001. We were working under Robert Knox at the time and expanding our knowledge of Bannu in Gandhara, where he was excavating, and Amaravati, which he had been publishing books on and articles on here in Telangana. And so we were really caught in the flux of examining and comparing sites that were at two opposite ends of the subcontinent, one on the border southwest of Peshawar and the other on this southeast coast right here in Telangana. And we were looking at the nature of the Roman trade that was going on with West Asia and with the Hellenistic world at both ends of the Indian subcontinent. In Gandhara, the ships were coming up the Indus, and then there was the land route across Kohat into the northwest frontier. And there was, of course, the Silk Road, which was the land route. On this side, it was the many ships that were coming up the Bay of Bengal and coming to Dharani Kota and then entering on the river network, and again taking advantage of the land routes that existed. So I was trying to compare the information that I was getting from both ends of South Asia and look at the different kinds of transculturalism that was building up. Writing and editing this book that I'm going to talk about also gave me the chance to reconnect with other colleagues and friends, Peter Skilling, John Guy, and Akira, who have worked on a comparative, John Guy and Akira have worked on a comparative analysis of sculptures. Then Parul Pandeyadhar also, she has examined the architecture. Visalatchi, who is here today and from whom you will hear, did the most wonderful work on re-evaluating our understanding of the site. How did this site really work? How was it approached? What might the different parts of the site have been in this monastery? How did the buildings function? And that gives us an idea about the kind of use that the building had, how many people actually visited this site. So that's vital information that we can talk to her about in the panel discussion afterwards. I think what we together as writers have wanted to do is come to an analysis of how do we approach this particular site. And for my talk today, I'm going to focus really on one sculpture. I'm going to, in the beginning of the talk, give you an introduction to the site. And then I'm going to zero in on just one sculpture to be able to talk about that in close detail. And along with that, I think I'm going to try and raise many issues around heritage management as well, about the politics of heritage management and about conservation, and what we are trying to do through organizations like the Crafts Council, I hope, which will take on some of these issues. Because I don't think these are matters that happen just in history. They are issues that affect our present. And so I'll come to that towards the end of my talk. Okay, so I'll take you through our book and a virtual tour of the site first. This is an aerial view of the site of Phanigiri. And the constructed site is located on top of an S-shaped hill. And in the middle of it all, there is a space which is raised. That's the stupa in the center of the serpent massif, right? And in the crook of the serpent's hood and its tail are two runoffs of water, where water can be gathered that come into reservoirs on the sides. And so you can understand the geological formation and how it aids the spread of water. So how well watered these fields are is something that you can clearly see what the groundwater level is like. And so the aerial map on Google is quite informative, telling you about the natural water catchment in the region. This is not incidental, this is quite important. The region is otherwise quite arid, but it harvests its rainwater in large reservoirs. Now, at the time when the spectacular terraced monastic complex was built, this was a rapidly expanding agricultural landscape when the older megalithic society was transforming into a monetized, wealthy, and a globally connected environment. So we are seeing a transformation from, this site has seen already a transformation from a megalithic society, older megalithic society, into a Buddhist society, and that is now converting into a Brahmanical society in this region. So we are seeing at least three main layers of history quite clearly at this one site. One of the water reservoirs surrounding the hill at Phanigiri can be seen in this slide. As I was saying, it's not a site that's limited to its history is not limited to the Satavahanas and the Ikshvakus, but it can be traced back several centuries earlier. Two circles of rocks that are actually cairns containing megalithic period cysts lie at the base of this pond and resurface when the water dries up in the summer months. They were partially excavated about 8-10 years ago, and the contents were found to be similar to the remains of nearby megalithic burials in the sites around Raigir and Bhongir or Bhuvanagiri and so on nearby. There are two reservoirs and aquifers, and now there is a temple that has been constructed on top of one of them. Well, now meaning, a few hundred years ago. When I visited the site for one of the times that I visited along with the government of Telangana's Heritage Department staff, they had very kindly come with me and we were all looking around, and suddenly I heard a bomb blast. And I couldn't quite believe I had heard that kind of blast. I just ignored it. I had a site map to draw, I had my field work to do, I had other important concerns, and this somehow processed in the back of my mind, and 5 minutes later I asked everyone, I said, that was a bomb blast, right? And they said, yes, it was, and I looked and I saw the perfect proverbial mushroom cloud. And the mining in the area is carrying on unabated, hugely, has been carrying on. And huge rocks are being blasted still. And it is an integral part of what you're living with over here in terms of the removal of massive aspects of the geology and history of the region. And sites like Phanigiri are in peril because Hyderabad has become so important that all these sites which are in the periphery of the city, which are major heritage sites, are now also being jeopardized, just as Hyderabad was 20 years ago with the massive development program. It's now these sites on the circumference of Hyderabad which are now really in danger. So it's worth thinking about that. Keep that in mind. This is a view of the Kakatiya period Vaishnav temple and some other painted Hindu rock carvings at Phanigiri. These steps that you see, under these steps is actually a massive water tank, and it's a huge water reservoir that carries on underneath this temple. So that's in the crook of the Serpent Rock. The complex includes 2 large and 2 small apsidal halls. What's an apsidal hall? One which is what we call in Sanskrit a Gajaprishta. which has the back of an elephant, which is ovoid at the back and has an apse, like a basilica would. This is an ancient form of architecture that was used widely all the way from the Greco-Roman world through the Middle East, through South Asia, and the most ancient caves that survive are very often replicas of apsidal temples. Apsidal shrines were the standard way in which ancient temples were made. So Cherala in Andhra, or Ter or Sonk in Mathura. Ter is in Maharashtra. These are some of the oldest temples that survive, which are all of this apsidal shape in construction. Now, this was also the design that was taken for making Buddhist chaityas. And here you see the foundations of two of these ovoid constructions. These two temples are right at the back. These are two very large ones. And then there are two smaller ones which are here. So you have a stupa area, and then you have monastic areas with these cells of monasteries around the central courtyard. And then you have over here a zone where there was an octagonal plinth on which there was a stupa. And then this is, of course, the really big stupa. Now, the precipice is very sharp over here. And imagine you're on the fields and in the ground, and you see this huge rock on top of which you see this stupa right on top, and flags and a big harmika and gold and silk fluttering in the sky. So you have to be able to imagine this entire monastery on top of this mountain, on this big monastery on top of this mountain. The site is dated by us largely between the 2nd to 4th centuries AD. So for those of you who really want to know when it was most active as a Buddhist site, it is between the 2nd to 4th AD. But it has an older history, which is megalithic. It has a subsequent history, which is Kakatiya. So it's not ever truly abandoned because it's a water reservoir and nobody is going to let go of their fields and cultivation in that region. But the religious affiliation of the site changes, and this Buddhist monastic area on top of the mountain is abandoned. And the abandonment is not just benign. Something happened in the time of the abandonment. A large number of the sculptures and portions of the stupa were picked up and put away in the site for safekeeping. Somebody obviously thought it appropriate, a group of people, very heavy, large sculptures, almost the size of this platform, solid, weighing many, many tons, were lifted, reorganized, and buried nearby. What might have led to an action like that? Why would somebody be interested in dismantling the site and keeping portions of it away so that they are not ruined? This seems to be a burning question when you approach this site, and it's a very interesting site for us to study for that reason, because it poses this question to us as to what happened at this site. Okay, let's look at the site map. There are 3 viharas, each containing 9 cells. The stupa has a view commanding the entire region, or to put it in better perspective, the stupa was the focus of this region, a constant reminder of the protection of the Buddha. It is 18 meters in diameter, the stupa, and has a platform in each of the 4 cardinal directions. Each platform is about 4 meters by little over 1 meter. And it would have originally supported what we call ayaka pillars, which are present on gateways in the stupas of the Deccan. There are 5 broken limestone stumps on the western platform, which make it clear it would have had these 5 ayaka pillars on that side. Now, in between the Mahastupa and the apsidal halls, there would have been an octagonal, smaller stupa. For art historians, there's been some excitement because it deals with the periods both of what we call the aniconic phase of the representation of the Buddha, and it carries on into the represented form of the iconic Buddha. So both are present at the site. When the excavations took place, this is taken from the Department of Heritage's publication. You can see a number of stupas, a number of sculptures are buried and put away over here for safekeeping. So portions of the top of the stupa, the gateway of the stupa, sculptures that would have been around it somewhere, another portion of the Toran gateway, had all been put together, not in places where they originally belonged in the building. They were not found in their original location in the excavation, but they had been disturbed. And that disturbance had taken place in antiquity itself, when they had been put aside for some reason. They'd been dismantled. The octagonal pillar at the site has a bilingual inscription of the king Rudra Purusha Datta. It's in near perfect condition. And while most of the inscription is in Sanskrit, the last few lines are in Prakrit. And one has to ask if this bilingualism, what might be the reason for it? And how do we read this? The inscription implies a competitive rivalry which existed at the time between the Buddhists and the Shaivas and the Vaishnavas in the region. I'm going to read this inscription out, which is why I was trying to get the text up on my screen. It says, I'm quoting, "Success in the 18th year, in the 3rd fortnight of winter, on the 3rd day. The chief physician of King Shri Rudra Purusha Datta, of a well-known blazing fame, carried out the erection of this Dharma Chakra, this Dharma wheel. The banner of pride of the one with the makar was not felled by the one with the banner of the bull." What is he talking about? He's saying the banner of pride of the one who has the makar on his banner, on his dhwaj. So who has the makar on his dhwaj? Kamdev. Manmat, yeah. That's right, Manmat. Kamdev. I couldn't hear you over here. Yeah. Was not felled by the one who has the bull on his banner. Shiva. So we all know of the great conflict between Shiva and Kama, right? And he says, so that one who could, that Kamadev who could not be felled even by Shiva, he has been felled by the descendant of the Shakya family by means of this wheel, of this chakra, born from the excellent dharma. So that Kama or desire which could not be quelled by Shiva has been quelled by the Buddhist dharma. The demon of hatred that was not killed by the mighty killer of Kans. The demon of hatred that was not killed by the mighty killer of Madhu. That one has been killed by the killer of passions by the means of his Dharma Chakra. Right? So clearly referring to Madhu and Kaitab and referring to Kans and Krishna. Right? And saying, so what Shiva could not do, what Vishnu has not been able to do, in both cases, the Dharma Chakra has been able to achieve. Fourth line says, the great forests of defilements have been burnt by him with the flame of knowledge that has the qualities of the highest dhyana, as fuel and its origin in the fire stick that is the body of Maya, by means of this very Dharma Chakra. May the world with the gods, demons and men know that this wheel endowed with such qualities is a donation by Dandinaka in the pleasure grove of the great general, erected for the sake of bringing about his own nirvana, and effected by the venerable sage Dhammasena. There are other inscriptions at Phanigiri which inform us about the festivals, constructions and renovations that went on within this site. The monk Dhammasena, we are told, himself erected a flower canopy over the umbrella on the main stupa and made a donation of 150 cows, while another group of monks, it seems, received a donation of gold coins, which was so vast that they were given this gold that there will be an eternal flame that will be maintained at the stupa site. So they were paid enough money, the interest from which would allow them to keep the flame burning at the site in perpetuity. These inscriptions may be few, but they tell us a lot about the environment of Buddhism in this region at that time. What was really going on in the social history of this region, how the complexion of this region was changing, how Brahmanism was rising, how there was what was the kind of sponsorship, what was the role of private capital in maintaining religious endowments. It's telling us a lot, giving us a lot of information about where philanthropy, what happened with philanthropy in times past, and how it needed to be protected and safeguarded. So I think these inscriptions, some of them are intact, some of them are fragmentary, some of them have been lying in the local site museum where the staff of the heritage department have very carefully been gathering these things and trying to keep them in little tubs and buckets so that they can be there for scholars who will come for generations to come and piece these things together like jigsaws to make the inscriptions whole and then start reading these inscriptions once again. I'm going to come back to this point at the end of my talk. Okay. Now, one of the chapters is perhaps the most eloquent chapter in the book is by Peter Skilling, who deals with the complexity of trying to understand what was the nature of Buddhism at this time, and why the visual record and the art and archaeology of these Buddhist sites like Phanigiri is so important, because it tells us something that we just can't reconstruct from the literature that is available from ancient Buddhism. And texts, why he, as a textual scholar who has studied the original texts in multiple Asian languages and translated them, feels that he is reading things in the visual record that he can't find in the textual record. And he's urging us to have a different way of thinking about the material when we approach the visual record. So it's a beautiful chapter that really comes out of a very informed position and with such finely calibrated vocabulary, I feel, such a carefully constructed piece of writing. It was a pleasure to be able to look at his work. Now, I can't presume to go into the details of all the different sects of Buddhism that were active at that time. One of the great complexities is that people have a very simplistic view of Buddhism being Theravada or Hinayan and Mahayana, when it was nothing quite as simple as that. There were at least about 25 different sects of Buddhism that were active in central India, Mathura, and in Telangana, and they were all slightly different from each other, and they had slightly different emphases. It doesn't seem to be that they were competitive and they were not at each other's throat, but they were certainly not one way of thinking about what was an ideal Buddhist practice and what they were emphasizing in their Buddhist practice, what means they had adopted for their meditation was also slightly different. And so I think these differences need to be understood, because I think different monasteries had lessons in and specializations in a different group of professors or their group of monks who taught the next generation. So one of the reasons why we have so many monasteries in the region is also because I think different monastic establishments had their own pedagogical emphases. There are many damaged statues of the Buddha and the Bodhisattvas that have been found in the region, and they are in the style of some of the most ancient statues of the Buddha. In art history, far too much emphasis has been paid on, and I hate to say this, on Gandhara and Mathura, at the cost of ignoring the other traditions of making Buddha images in South Asia. The recent exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum on tree and serpent worship, in which the Phanigiri pieces form the grandest examples in that entire show, are a case in point to try and fix this problem. and to try and bring emphasis back to South Indian Buddhism at this moment in time of the 2nd century. As you can see, I mean, these are pictures taken from my mobile phone while I'm holding the statues that we were finding at the site, and that's one angle. That's the reverse of the same head. It comes from one such Buddha, not that particular Buddha, but there are several such Buddha statues that would have been at the site, very much of the phase of what we call the iconic images. Sculptures of bodhisattvas began to be carved at these sites from the 3rd century AD. So this is the period when we can date the freestanding statues of the Buddha that have been found in Amravati, Nagarjunakonda, Phanigiri. Some are smaller than life size. Others are indicative of the shift towards gigantic images which had started to be made in other regions of Andhra Pradesh. There were also colossal images of the Buddha being created in distant lands associated with the Kushans, which simultaneously saw the rise of theism. There's a shift in the nature of religion that is taking place, not just in Brahmanical religion, with the coming of the Bhagavad Gita sometime 300-400 years earlier, but even in Buddhism, where the Buddha is being turned into not a guru. From that status, he has been turned into a miracle-working God. So there is the miracle of Shravasti, for instance, where he multiplies himself in many dimensions and different lokas and manifests that form of himself, becomes a scene which starts being shown in art. And there is a shift in the nature of religion itself, which begins to treat the Buddha as a god. And that shift is accompanied with the rise of a lot of images of the master, where he is treated as a god. Now, alongside, this is happening in Brahmanical religions as well, where where there was no murti puja, suddenly now there are temples and there are murtis which are being made. And whether it is all over this region or in North India, suddenly there is a rise of temples and a focus of worship of images. So it's within this larger context that we can also see Phanigiri. I feel that the other reason why it's important is because some of these ideas don't stay limited to what is happening within South Asia. This has bearing on all the regions and places with which South Asia was trading more than just economic produce, but was trading ideas. And these ideas were migrating all the way to Cambodia and Vietnam in the Mekong Delta. They were migrating very clearly to Sri Lanka. And again, it is to our detriment that we don't adequately teach the art of Sri Lanka in our classes. I feel that it is so intimately a part of what is happening in South Asia, and it's not a one-way street where it went from India to those places, but it were ideas from those places that were being imported into India as well, across the coast of Kalinga, coming into Andhra Pradesh, and coming across into the Bay of Bengal, up into Bengal as well. There were many ideas that were migrating from Thailand and Burma and Sri Lanka and Cambodia and Laos and Vietnam, coming into South Asia just as they were going from South Asia to Southeast Asia. I think one of the most exciting things, and the reason I chose it for the cover, is that the harmika of the stupa at Phanigiri is octagonal. The yupa pillar inside the harmika on top of the stupa has a octagonal shaft, not a square shaft as you sometimes have in the Western Indian stupas. And in the four directions, there is a Mithun couple. A Mithun couple is an erotically charged, loving couple. Their presence on the doorways of Buddhist shrines as well as on Yashti pillars or Yupa pillars is something that John Guy elaborates on in his chapter. I want to say that there is a substantial variety of Mithun depictions in the art of the Satavahanas and the Ikshvakus. These couples are also found in the Buddhist art of Gandhara. And there is little doubt, therefore, that they had become part and parcel of the wider iconographic program of Buddhism by the 3rd century AD. And this is critical information for art historians, because this is the kind of stuff that goes into Hindu art subsequently, where we find Mithun couples are always present on the gateway of a Hindu temple, or on the outer boundaries of Hindu temples. And so where is the history of how far back does this practice of putting an erotic couple at the entrance go? And it goes all the way back to sites like this. I decided to compare it with a verse from the Gatha Shaptashati, the Satvahana poet Hal, who had written remarkable in Maharashtri Prakrit, had written his poetry, very erotic poetry, at about the same time when this site was active. And I just thought that if this is the poetry in the vernacular, in the language of the region, then we should actually be able to read that. And one verse in it stuck out: "The ache of separation ends but in death's diversions." So it's only finally death that will quell all the different vicissitudes of the distractions that the erotic mind has. The mind's constant yearning for some other erotic condition will only finally end with death. And so putting these mithuns on a monument, a sepulchral monument, a monument of death, I thought was always quite curious. Why would they be there? What function do they perform? Why are these sculptures present there? They're fantastical, apart from the charming ways in which the couple is shown embracing, each time differently. The sculpture also has these hybrid creatures of the sea and rebirth and regeneration, which are these composite creatures which migrate between one lok and another lok. They don't belong to one species, they don't belong to one type, one condition. They belong to multiple conditions. So the head of a person, the body of a gana, the tail of a fish, that come together, and then on the side you have makara faces, all coming together into a single composite creature. So these composite creatures are about migrating from one world into another world. This is the study by John Guy, which also includes, apart from the relic deposits that were found, also includes mention of this particular large statue. Now this is, I think, one of the great pieces of art that we have from Phanigiri. It's the most spectacular of the pieces, frankly, to my mind. There are few statues of this caliber. It's nearly life-size, for you to understand. It's an extraordinary statue. It's unlike most of Amravati, Nagarjunakonda, etc., which you have flat two-dimensional relief. Here is a three-dimensional sculpture. John feels it's probably a yaksh. I feel it's more likely to be a bodhisattva. And there are various reasons why I believe that it's in keeping with Mahayana iconography. There is an old belief that there is not so much Mahayana in this part of India. I don't think that's true. I think Mahayana ideas had spread quite far into the southeast and into Phanigiri, especially given the time frame of the 3rd, 4th centuries. It's quite understandable that this would be that. There is a certain sophistication and delicacy in the carving of the finger, in the way in which the tassels have been arranged. Zooming in to just look at the detailing of the body does make it clear that it is perhaps one of the most spectacular works of Andhra sculpting that survives in any museum anywhere in the world. Nothing quite like it. The in situ position of the statue at the time of the 2004 excavations, you can see how it was propped up against one of the boundary walls. Now, more recently, I had the privilege when Visalatchi was in Hyderabad last to be able to go and access this particular statue, which is the stucco statue that was found over there. Also nearly life-size. And this seems more like a yaksha, but perhaps it's a bodhisattva also. We don't know. It might be a yaksha or a bodhisattva or a dwarapala, quite likely given his physiognomy. I find this extremely important, because in art history we keep talking about we have only the stone record from this time, and very few people know that the statues and the temples and the stupas of South India were covered in stucco. Now, stucco is an unfired clay, it's plaster. And people think that stucco sculptures were only made in Gandhara. And that's not true. It was not just Takshila and Peshawar which were making, and Afghanistan which was making stucco images. We have the remnants of stucco all over your South Indian Gopurams. Your Vaikuntha Perumal temple in Kanchipuram is entirely, it's a stone temple which has been covered in stucco. And the stucco cladding or stucco carvings, which you very often have in the Gopurams, which are all very gaudily painted and everything, is part and parcel of a very ancient tradition. And because the high rainfall is such that these would get washed away, but they would get remade, that's the way they get renovated in most South Indian temples. So plaster work and plaster sculptures was very much part of the South Indian tradition, just as it was a part of the Gandhara tradition. And luckily, at Phanigiri, we got not just this grand example of one, but we got lots of little fragments of broken bits of stucco, which show us that what we know of the way in which these sites looked on the basis of the stone sculpture is a very limited view. That actually these sculptures, these sites must have been completely covered and decorated with floral decoration and garlands which were made out of these flowers that would have decorated these stupas and the entrance gateways to all the cells, and on the periphery, places where they didn't want to lavish the money on a stone sculpture, they would have made these clay sculptures. And the most exciting of them were these two heads, which are lying right here in Hyderabad, the head of Shankhanidhi and Padmanidhi, the two yakshas that would have been at the entrance. And because they are absolutely identical to the ones that were found at Nagarjunakonda, which are made out of stone, the Nagarjunakonda ones are made out of stone, the Phanigiri ones are made out of clay, unfired clay, stucco. And that gives you an idea about how these statues, how these stupa sites were used and how ideas spread. So there is something that is in the workshop where they've worked out the form, the guild has worked out the form, and now if these people can't afford it in stone, they'll make it for them in clay. Does something wonderful, which is that she zones the entire region into 4 clear areas, and we're going sort of the numbering has been done conservatively, going from 1 to 4, but in her chapter she suggests something rather radical, that 4 should be 1 and 1 should be 4. But she follows the older received wisdom of accessing the site and calling it 1, 2, 3, and 4, because that's the incline from which we approach the site. The gentle, when you drive up to the site, which I hope you will do now, you will access the site from here. But the focus of the site is that. Now, did pilgrims in ancient times walk up gently, go around the site, do a pradakshina, enter from the gateway somewhere on the side, and then go either left or right, and then go eventually around the stupa? Or, like pilgrims are wont to do, you always see the temple on top and you have to climb up the steps for the darshan straight up to the main shrine, right? And there is indeed all along over here where you see these euphorbia cactoids coming out, they're actually coming out of the sockets, out of the holes in the ground, which are not new holes. They're cavities that might have been there from ancient times to support a staircase that could have actually gone down the rock face. And I think it's a fantastic suggestion because that allows us to think about the way in which pilgrims would have climbed up the mountainside on the steep side, perhaps, and come up to the stupa, because there has to be some exertion, right? When you go up and you feel the pain, and then you reach the stupa site, you would have done your pradakshina, listened to your lessons, attended to the monks, gone and visited the temples at the back, and then exited the site, perhaps. So we don't know for sure, but the suggestions are there, and they're interesting suggestions to read through. So these are the detailed drawings, etc., which survive, and some of the archaeological material that has been found at the site, including Roman coins, and that gives us an idea about dating these shrines and the site. Okay, Akira Shimada does a detailed study of the material from the site. Parul Pandyadhar does a superb study of the Toran gateway. The Toran gateway is remarkable because we don't get Toran gateways like this in South India. We only get them at Sanchi, in Mathura, in North India. Phanigiri is unusual because it's the only site really in the whole of the Deccan which has a Toran gateway. And this Torana gateway, we had lots of interesting conversations on thinking about what is the meaning of the narrative over here. Is there a difference in what would have been on the outer face of the gateway versus the storyline which is on the inside of the gateway? What is the pilgrim being told when you're on the outside? And what is the transformed nature of the message once you've done the pradakshina inside and when you're leaving what you see? So what's the difference in the storyline? And I won't go into that because we haven't got time, but this is something that you can actually read in Parul's chapter. Now, she's attempted a very detailed reconstruction of the different portions. Each panel, these are the missing bits that we don't yet have, the white bits, but the rest, what we've been able to pull together, she's given us the images to try and understand what it means. My work really has been on this particular statue, which I call the jewel in the crown, Lessons on Heritage from Phanigiri. There is a remarkable statue which has been lying in the State Museum over here. It was pilfered, but it was retrieved. It was pilfered from the site, but it was retrieved and put in the museum, and the museum was so scared that it might ever get stolen again that they embedded it in concrete. Now, as conservators, we now know that that is not something that is advisable, but you have to be sympathetic. You have to understand that they couldn't risk statues like this being stolen again and again from India, right? So other means have to now be thought about the security of these sites, our viewing pleasure, which means that security doesn't mean that you put everything behind glass, because that's another problem. So how do you keep it like the rest of the world does? Keep it outdoors, keep it for people to see. Outdoors, no, but I mean, keep it open, and yet have it secure, right? We have to think about ways of doing that. So when the body in Indian art was being curated by me in 2013, I made a request in 2011 to borrow this sculpture and to show it in Brussels and then to show it at the National Museum in Delhi. And my request was declined very politely by the government of Telangana, which had just recently been created because the assets of Andhra and Telangana had not yet been divided, and it wasn't yet clear as to who was going to be the loaning authority and whose image it was, and certainly nobody was going to take responsibility for taking it out of the concrete, and so on and so forth. So the sculpture couldn't be taken for that exhibition. 2017, I was co-curating India and the World, A History in 9 Stories, which was a curatorial dialogue between the British Museum and India. It was a story about, the backstory was the criticisms that have been levied against the British Museum for having taken away the loot of India and during the period of empire, with the growing claims in the world of repatriation. And the British Museum claiming that it is a custodian of the heritage of the world, which it is willing to share with the people of the world. And it is not only for the edification of British people living in Bloomsbury, but it is actually a museum that is committed to the uplift of the world. And so the British Museum lent 100 of its choicest pieces of world history to India, which Indians would never normally have had the opportunity to see, and said that they will not be lending Indian objects to India because India already has a surfeit of badly looked after Indian objects, and it's about time Indian museums started showing their treasures alongside, which are of equal quality. And indeed, rather than clamoring for the Amaravati stones, we had Phanigiri material. And the Phanigiri material is exquisite, and it deserved to be shown on the world stage at par with. And this was an opportunity, so we made a request, and the government of Telangana very kindly worked with the State Museum, and the CSMVS Museum's conservation team came here and removed it from the concrete, took the piece to Mumbai, where it was conserved over 3 months and reconsolidated. All its broken fragments were put back together, and it was made exhibition worthy. So we used the exhibition as an opportunity to invest in the conservation of this sculpture and show it. But the reason I chose this sculpture is because of the storyline. And the story of this sculpture is quite amazing. The sculpture is divided into 3 registers. The bottom register shows the departure of Siddharth from his palace, which is this gateway that you see over here, and he's leaving at night, and there's a man carrying a flame, and he's leaving on his beloved horse Kanthak. The middle scene shows a scene from the Lalita Vistar, in which he throws away his courtly garments and his crown, his turban, and he discards it all, and people are around him. They are horrified at what they are seeing. And the final scene on top, which you can see, the whole thing is carved in the shape of a pagdi. The whole thing is carved like a turban. This upper portion, can you see this? It's a turban. And in the middle of the turban, there is a scene of a man carrying a salver or a tray in which there is a turban. So there is a turban inside a turban. Right? And it's a very peculiar thing, what's going on in this sculpture. So let's decode it. How much time do I have? Am I out of time, or do I have 7 minutes? Can I take another 7 to 8 minutes, please? So this is the scene of Siddharth leaving the palace, and you can see how refined the carving is. The mood, the expression, the person looking away, the person moving forward, the person regretting that he is leaving his palatial home as he marches on his journey of discovery. There are wonderful quotations in Buddhism that deal with this moment. These locks of mine are not suited for a mendicant. Now it is not right for anyone else to cut the hair of a future Buddha, so I will cut them off myself with my sword. Then taking his sword in his right hand and holding the plaited tresses together with the diadem on them with his left, he cut them off. So his hair was thus reduced to 2 inches in length, and curling from the right, it lay close to his head and remained that length as long as he lived, and his beard similarly. There was no need at all to shave either hair or beard anymore. So this is the moment in the center of the scene in which he cuts his hair. There is a more cynical view of the materialism that governs the ties of familial love, which lies embedded in the poetic rendition of this episode in a play called the Buddha Charita that was written by Ashwaghosh at about the same time. Ashwaghosh is a playwright who was working at the same moment, and the theatricality with which Ashwaghosh communicates this scene where Buddha threw off his turban and cut off his hair is quite interesting. In Canto 6 of the play, Chandak, that is Siddharth's manservant, is sent back home to Shuddhodhan, that is Siddharth's father, the king. And the artistic reenactment of it is in the heart of the play. I'm going to read from Patrick Olivell's translation. He says, on reaching the forest, thanking Chandak, the Bodhisattva says, why do we support our family and our fathers and our children? One supports a son for the sake of a family. One serves a father to be able to get sustenance. The world shows affection only for a motive. Kinship cannot endure without a cause. And so, taking the shining gem from his headdress, a gem that performed the task of a lamp, he stood there as he made his oration like Mount Mandar holding up the sun. And he said, "With this gem, Chandar, you must pay repeated homage to my father the king and beseech him, without being diffident, to relieve his anguish, and say to him that it was the firm resolution, as you know, of our ancestors. Please do not grieve for me as I walk on this path, my patrimony. For when a man passes away, there are heirs to his wealth, but heirs to dharma on this earth are absent and are hard to find. So for my patrimony, my grandson, your grandson and others will be there. I have provided you that. You can pass the throne on and pass these jewels on, but please relieve me of the responsibility. He wished to abdicate, and he wanted to go on the path of dharma instead. And so he took his family pagdi, the turban, and he threw it away. Now, pagdi uchhalna is a phrase that all of you who know a little bit of Hindi will know is a muhavra, which is still very commonly used. It means about literally you're getting rid of your family honor, right? And getting rid of the family prestige, the crown. When he heard these words of his, Chanda, overcome by grief, folded his hands and replied in a voice choking with tears, and exhorted the Bodhisattva to reconsider his decision, and said, "If you have made up your mind to abandon your father and kingdom, please don't abandon me, my lord, for your feet are my sole refuge." Siddhartha explained to him that in turn, even those who love each other are forced to be separated by death, just as his mother had been separated from him at birth. Right? He says, if my mother could abandon me and die on me, then what are you and what are my father? So there is this wonderful psychological drama that the Ashwaghosh's play encapsulates. And to see the theatre of that time in relation to the sculptures of that time does make a wonderful confluence of the coming together of the visual culture and the art of that period to be able to contextualize it. So the Bodhisattva then cut off his turban and hair with a sword taken from Chandak's hand. And when he cut off his turban, his hair, and when he threw his turban, it seemed as if he was throwing a swan into a lake. As it was thrown up, heavenly beings caught it out of reverence so that they may worship it, and throngs of gods in heaven paid it homage with divine honors according to rule. This is when the turban lands up in heaven. So the whole thing is shaped like a pagdi, but these are the Lokapalas who have lifted up the turban and they're celebrating it. Now, every self-respecting turban has a jewel in the crown. And I wanted to use the metaphor of the jewel in the crown when referring to the British Museum, drawing on Paul Scott's Raj Quartet, which all of you who've read novels and fiction and historical fiction must be familiar with Paul Scott's Raj Quartet. And there is a critique against the British Museum that it doesn't get rid of the jewel in the crown, which is Amaravati. Right? It doesn't want to. What is its attitude towards the jewel in the crown of the British Museum? Just like the Kohinoor might be the jewel in the crown of the British Empire, ditto the jewel in the crown of the British Museum is Amaravati. And so so one has to think about, what is happening about the repatriation claims and are they deserved? And yet here Siddhartha is saying, don't hang on to your materialism. There are other things. And he gets rid of the jewel in his crown because he can't be bothered with it. He says, you want the material, keep it. Right? And so it's a very interesting question. And I thought that the question needs to come to the public attention. The question needs to be addressed as saying, what is our own heritage telling us with a site like Phanigiri? And not just in terms of the myth and the metaphor, but also in terms of what we are doing about the conservation status of Phanigiri. Are we going to let Phanigiri fall to rack and ruin while we make false claims about wanting things back from the rest of the museum? Is it all about possession? Or is it about maintenance? Are we burdened by our inheritance, like Siddhartha was? Incapable of looking after it? Or saying that this is all material, because our museums are a shambles and we don't really think about what we need to do to be able to inform our public, to be able to get on with getting the public invested in heritage management, which is why institutions like the CCT matter, because they are doing a public outreach and getting the public citizenry involved in getting them interested in heritage. And getting the message and getting we, as a few committed art historians and people working in the Department of Heritage or whatever, cannot be in charge of looking after the vast amounts, the only people in charge without public participation. We're doing it for the sake of the public, right? We're doing it for the sake of the public's involvement. Now, if the public itself is not interested, why would the politician give the Department of Heritage the funding that it requires? It's only once the public starts actually saying that the site of Phanigiri matters to us, or sites like this matter to us, give us a site museum, give us interpretative links, give us this material, that the next fiscal allocation will have a greater amount of money given to Phanigiri or to heritage management. So this is something to think about as we look at these exquisite statues of the site. This is the back of that statue. So you can see how it was like a turban. By the way, this is not the only place in India where we get this story about Siddhartha throwing away his turban. It's there as early as Bharut. It's there in Sanchi. This is the temple in Devalok where the turban is being worshipped and the divine people are dancing there. This is again the turban that goes to heaven, and again this is the temple in heaven where the turban is kept. The scene is depicted in Kanganahalli also, where the turban is being taken up to heaven by the divine beings. In fact, there is a temple in heaven where in the Gavaksha, or in the Chaitya window, in the Lalata Bimba, right on top, there is the turban in the temple. So there is a context for seeing these depictions, a famous idea of the turban of the Buddha being worshipped. I think the side walls of this particular turban relief are also quite informative because they have carved pillars. I can't get into the details of all of these carvings with you, but I want you to understand that these kind of stelae with a curved top are there as memorials which are there in many parts of the region, are actually also the idea behind some of the pillars at Ashokan monuments, at stupas, and are like the way you have memorial pillars, which would be, I think they're also related to some of the ayakas, because some ayaka pillars do have relic pots underneath them that have been found. So I think there is a larger history of contextualizing this object, this type of object. Where does the shape and this object come from? Okay, so the politics of showing this object is what I was showing in this exhibition. The jewel in the crown, as I was explaining. Now, this is one of the exhibitions that is happening at the British Museum, and I wanted to play with these three ideas of the jewel in the crown of Paul Scott's Raj Quartet, the jewel in the crown, the Kohinoor and repatriation claims, the jewel in the BM's crown, the Elliot and Elgin marbles. Elliot marbles refers to the Amravati marbles. Now, when Neil MacGregor wrote A History of the World in 100 Objects, after that, he decided to collaborate with India and asked me to collaborate and co-write India and the World, which was supposed to be the corollary. And in that, we brought the British Museum's objects, which we juxtaposed with Indian objects in the CSMVS in Mumbai. And I wanted to play directly with this metaphor for the loss of heritage and inheritance. How are we going to think about this and deal with this loss? As a curator in the press conferences, I had often been asked, now that you're bringing objects from the British Museum to India, will you be getting the Indian treasures that lie in Britain? What justification was there for not? Little, except to highlight the often told point that you cannot undo history. It's better to find the terms for looking ahead And what will those terms be? What will that narrative be for looking ahead? Because you can't undo the past, right? You have to find a constructive way forward. And this exhibition of India in the world was meant to be a collaborative effort of how we are jointly generating narratives as shared owners of World Heritage, where we expect the British Museum to invest in the museums of Amaravati and Phanigiri and so on, in the conservation of the objects in India, in training the staff and management of India, just as we expect our staff to go there and inform them about their objects that they have from Indian collections, to be able to talk about the provenance histories openly in their museums about how these objects were commandeered during the empire and displayed over there. There has to be a productive way of talking about history and using it to go forward. Other issues that were raised in the 2-year-long curatorial discussions are telling of the compulsions and exigencies of our times. What, for example, what significance does an artwork or ritual object have for some people might be something which is not a ritual object, but only of anthropological interest to somebody else. So when I'm displaying it, which narrative am I going to privilege? The sacrality of the object or the anthropological interest of that object, right? How am I displaying it? Aesthetics cannot be avoided, even in an exhibition that was conceived as a history exhibition. By what reasoning would the objects be included in such an exhibition? By what reasoning would they be staged in the curatorial display? You know, a lot of backstories and meta thinking goes into the design and display strategy for a major history exhibition like this, because you have to think about it very politically. It's a big public propaganda exercise, right? You have to think about the positioning of your narrative with great responsibility as to how is that narrative going to be received by the public? Now, the British Museum had done a lot to protect its Amaravati statues. So through the 90s, when this gallery was created in the British Museum for its Amaravati statues, it was considered the state-of-the-art gallery. And until 2015, so 25 years later, articles were coming out in the Hindu that were shaming the Chennai Museum at Egmore for the way it displayed its Amaravati statues. The Amaravati statues, you know, with these walls that were sodden with water, and water we know is calamitous for the limestone statues. And now, finally, the Amaravati wing in the Chennai Museum has been cleaned up after a lot of public protests in the newspapers. It took a lot of effort to clean that up. Now, this is something that we need to keep in mind, that without citizen action, there can actually be no way of preserving this material. And it took a lot of citizen action to be able to get the Chennai Museum to protect its material, and repeated things in the public domain, in the press in Chennai. So as a symbol of that, it was appropriate to locate an object that could tell these rich stories, and that's why I made a case for this object to be included in the exhibition. The exhibition, as I said, made an opportunity for this broken and fragmented sculpture that was once at the site to be repaired in our laboratories and then to be put on display, finally, in the museum in a grand way for the public to be able to see. But what's going to happen with all these things that are lying fragmented in the Phanigiri site? All these objects, these broken bits and the edges of the toran, portions of the harmika, portions of the yashti, portions of the balustrade that goes up to the upper level, right? It's going to take lifetimes of our students, our researchers. I won't be able to, in my lifetime, see to the restoration of all of these things, with all things coming. And so these are sites which are going to need employment for generations of people to come, restore, fix, maintain. That site museum that needs to be created at Phanigiri is one which should have a laboratory and a pedagogical outreach where generations of conservators can get trained in how to fix all of this. This is not to shame anyone. This is the problem that we have inherited. So we have to find a way to fix this problem and move forward. I thought that the exhibition allowed us an opportunity through one object to touch on all of these diverse things. So in the end, looking at the spectacular carving once again, this beautiful carving, I'm going to leave you with one parting shot when Siddharth threw away his turban, looking closely at the sculpture. One man salutes him for doing what he did, praising him. What a wonderful thing Siddharth has done. And the other man is shocked. He is completely hiding his face in horror and shame that God, he's given away his entire inheritance. What is he doing? Right? And I think that's our attitude, really, the shock and the salutation, that we ourselves are like that. We don't know whether to take the moral high ground and say we are beyond materialism, or whether we are actually horrified because we are so materialistic that we want it all for ourselves. So I hope we can use that as a springboard for some conversation. I gather they have some copies of the book available. Sometimes the Marg team even has discounts. I don't know if they have one today. I hope you enjoy it, and I'll be happy to take any questions if you have any in the panel conversation.
You've asked us very pertinent questions. We are astounded by the amount of art that we have in our own backyard that we didn't know about. But I'm sure we'll be able to talk a little more about it when I invite on stage the panelists for today's discussion. Mrs. Visalatchi to come onto the stage, and also Dr. Aloka, please. Batch officer of the Indian Postal Service in the rank of director. She is a postgraduate in psychology from the University of Madras and an MBA. In 2015, she was posted on deputation as Managing Director, Department of Heritage, Telangana, and currently she is CEO, Arogysri Health Care Trust with the Government of Telangana. While with the Department of Heritage, she was instrumental in organizing international seminars on emerging trends in archaeology, epigraphy, coinage, and the Buddhist heritage of Telangana. Under her stewardship, several heritage monuments of Hyderabad and Telangana were restored and revitalized by the government under the public-private partnership model with renowned heritage stakeholders, such as what we are seeing at the Qutub Shahi Tomb complex. Her abiding interest in architectural history progressed into undertaking further research in the subject, and she has curated studies and publications on the cultural heritage of Telangana. Today, she will share valuable insights on the Phanigiri discoveries. Dr. Aloka Parashar completed a PhD from the University of London in 1978. From 1979 till her recent retirement, she taught history at the University of Hyderabad, where she is Professor Emeritus in the Department of Sanskrit Studies. Amongst her academic assignments are a fellowship at the University of Heidelberg, visiting professor and Fulbright scholar at the University of California, Berkeley, and the first occupant of the rotating chair at the University of Heidelberg. She was also first occupant of the Saroj and Pem Singhamar Chair in Classical Indian Polity at the Department of History and Classics, University of Alberta. More recently, she was visiting faculty at Kriya University, Andhra Pradesh. She holds a Career Award in Social Studies with the UGC and was member of the Indian Council for Historical Research. She was nominated member of Research Advisory Committee for History of Science at the National Science Academy. She has numerous publications on archaeology, social and economic history, religion and gender, with specific focus on the Deccan. Her academic writing and research are widely read, referenced, and awarded. Professor Sen will be moderating today's panel discussion Over to you, madam. Thank you.
And thank the Crafts Council for having, after this illuminating talk that Professor Ahuja has given us, to also give us an opportunity to have a panel discussion. I think we have generally agreed, and I think Naman has already prefaced what our discussions are going to be about, and that is to really focus on, like we are here today, what should be the future about heritage and conservation, especially when we look at it in terms of localities, our local situation, you know, rather than talking in grand terms about the subcontinent as a whole, as Yashwantji said, our backyard, and you know, how do we proceed forward? So we are very fortunate to have Visalatchi with us, because she, as an officer of the government of Telangana, looked after the heritage department. So unlike Naman and myself, who are like embedded in the deep historical and artistic research that we do all lifelong, you came in and you took a look at this site of Phanigiri. So maybe we should start with her reactions on what it meant to look at the Phanigiri site, and how did the department approach the work there, and could we use some of those ideas to plan for the future, looking at not only the excavation, but I think that there are other modalities also that go into looking after a site after it is excavated. So maybe perhaps we could start with that, and then we can open up to some themes, which of course, Norman, you have already sort of flagged them, but then we can have a broader discussion and all of us can participate in that. So over to you.
I thank Crack Council for giving us this opportunity discussing over Phanigiri, and I'm glad it is Phanigiri. To start with, when it was actually Dr. Parul Pandyadar who approached me first. She is a scholar who works extensively on Toranas. And when she approached me, she came with a question that I just want to have the photographs of Phanigiri Toranas, and can you please share? That is when we realized that we don't have the complete pictures of these Toranas, because as soon as they were excavated, they were put in the places where they were, and the other side of the Torana was never photographed. So we did not even have the photographs of these architraves. So that is where we started the whole journey. And why Phanigiri? Why not other sites? Because we have much larger complexes like Nalakondapalli, Dhulikata, etc. So why Phanigiri? We could draw a lot of social relevance even for today's life from Phanigiri. From a very topical, like the name Phanigiri. In Telangana, we have so many people named like Phani Kumar, Phani Prasad, Phanita, etc., etc. Very typically regional. And the inscriptions that come from Phanigiri also are very relevant to today's society. One of the inscriptions, it says that a donation is made to Bhagavantu, means the donation was made specifically to Lord Buddha. And they made a differentiation between the Sangha and Buddha. So we could, today we say that Ramlalla is a legal entity. Shabrimala, there's a separate council for the presiding deity. So where does it come from? So we see the differentiation made to the legal entity separately, and the endowments being made in Buddha's name. So at a very deeper level, we are having the continuing effect on a society from those practices which originated, we do not know, even prior to this inscription. So that way, so from a societal point of view, again, these inscriptions give names of women, Kitanika and Buddhanika. Two ladies have made endowments in this site. So which clearly says that the socio-economical positioning of women in that day society, at least those women coming from great merchant families or the royal families had their own decision-making powers. So are we able to relate to that fact from today's point of view? Or, have we attained that 100% saturation in that particular aspect of society? So Phanigiri that way is a very intricate site which throws towards us a lot of questions socially, economically, and religious. I mean, Naman was talking about its religious positioning in the whole context. So today if you go to the site, you will see in zone 4, which is the core of stupa site, a Shivlinga made up of marble, the Banavattam as well as the Linga you would see. Right in the middle of that stupa square. And again, you would see the material being used in the Gopura of the 2 temples which are located at the foothills. So how should we take it? Should we take it as a continuity? Should we take it as a kind of village? So how are we going to interpret it? How are we going to place it on record? So these are the bigger questions that the site of Phanigiri poses before us. So that is why we had to start it from Phanigiri. And Phanigiri going forward, the 3 important 3-dimensional sculptures or sculpted pieces that are coming from Phanigiri, the Bodhisattva, the panel which just now the carrying of the tuft or turban of Buddha, and the Dharma pillar, the Dharma wheel pillar with its inscription. These 3 are very important 3-dimensional objects in the art history of Telangana. So how are we going to conserve it? So this poses a much wider question. How many conservation institutes we have in Telangana? How many colleges do we teach field archaeology? So the problem, probably starts from there. Are we identifying the need of going deeper into the subject, equipping our youth with what is required, academically and otherwise, and then taking over the responsibility for our inherited heritage. I think that's what. So this is what the problem that I faced as Director Heritage, and the problem still continues.
Yes, you very rightly pointed that out, because even in the United State of Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, before 2014, one of the major problems was exactly this, that departments of history were being closed down and departments of tourism and stuff like that were being opened. There was kind of an increasing tendency. And so you very rightly pointed out that we need, and as Naman also pointed out, we really need a resource base, a human resource base of a younger generation that would, be interested in doing conservation work, preservation, and that where do they have to go for their training? So they have to go to the ASI in Delhi and do it, or learn by hit and try, like in the department that you headed as director. Most of the staff there learn through the progression of their career. They learn how to, some of them go for archaeological training, a large majority do.
And my needs will be completely different from what is being taught in ASI. For example, stucco. It is not just Phanigiri which is so fully laid with stucco figures. We have this Gollantakudi in Mehboob district, which is one of the earliest standing brick structure, Jain structure in South India, which is again fully, on one side you could see a beautiful stucco figurines, but the other side is of course spoiled because of exposure to rain and weather. So my requirement is completely maybe localized, and what the world is teaching me may not be enough for me. So it is, people who teach me should come from me. Therefore, my needs are addressed properly. This is what is the gap that I feel that needs to be addressed urgently.
Yes, you very rightly pointed out that when you are located in a particular situation, nobody quite understands what the local constraints and inhibitions are. And, it's not a free hand like we may want to articulate. But we don't want this discussion to sort of only revolve around the problems and anxieties that we have at the ground level, at the practical level, and so on. So I wanted to, Naman has sort of flagged many issues that we should be discussing in the panel and also with the audience. But I'd like to begin with one of the, a major issue, which has relevance for us today, and as you also pointed out, what are the issues that are relevant for us today. One of them, and I don't know whether it's in the introduction or the preface, Naman, you mentioned this also, that with this rampant urbanization that is taking place around Hyderabad, what will be the impact on heritage and all. And then you also posed, not a kind of obliquely posed the question that there was an urbanization of the early centuries of the Christian era as well. So what was happening when these, you see, it's not just Phanigiri, by the way. Just a few kilometers away, there's Vardhamanu Kota, and then there's Gazulbanda, then there is, there are various vihara sites. So I would try to want to know, because you all have been working in the area, that with innumerable such vihara sites, none of them were actually located in an urban milieu. They were perhaps on important trade routes. So I'm told that the Department of Heritage, I think Madam Bharati is over here, more recently has also excavated at a site called Pajuru, if I'm not wrong, and that site has much more evidence of trade items, artifacts, and so on. There is, of course, a Buddhist stupa and all. And further south, you have Nelakondapalli and Yaleshwaram. And these definitely were urban settlements. And to the famous site of Kondapur. Right? Now, these are urban settlements. But these viharas are, I would think, in more rural setting. And as you showed us, the visuals, the water, the rice-based water cultivation that's continuing today, which you can see from the mount. So were the Buddhists facing an onslaught of urban expansion, or what was it that was making them survive? Was the surplus of the agrarian communities? Because I don't see a similar kind of threat that these monasteries posed because of rampant urbanization that we face today, for example.
I think the questions of the deforestation of India, the megalithic societies were confronted with the rampant urbanization that was taking place, and the Buddhist monasteries were the ones that were not faced with the onslaught of urbanizations, but they were the product of the urbanization. They were fulfilling the requirements of the urban population at a safe distance from the urban. So the Udyan is always, and the Vihara is located just outside. So that has been the formula everywhere, whether it was at Amaravati and Dharanikota or Vidisha and Sanchi, or anyway, it's just at a safe distance away, or Sarnath outside Kashi.
And outside Kashi.
Yeah. And so you would have the urban development and the deforestation and the transformation of those megalithic landscapes was happening very actively at this time. The urbanization is akin to the kind of urbanization that we have experienced now in this millennium. So 2 millennia ago was the last time when we had experienced this level of deforestation.
So can I just interrupt? And so would you suggest that the megalithic society or the cultures of the megalith, these people, these were destroyed, or they got integrated? They got integrated.
They got integrated. And their integration and the politics and the history of that integration is a key subject for us to be able to study how that integration took place, how that amalgamation took place at that time. I think we can look at some of these issues. The reason I think Phanigiri is a great site is that it's a small, contained, but very meaningful site to invest in, where so many critical questions for our times can be addressed all in one place. And that doesn't stop us, like when you visit Roman sites, you know, every village, every town has a Roman museum. And they have their own Roman museum with the Roman artifacts. So that it doesn't mean that because you're doing one, you can't do another. But Phanigiri is a little special because of the quality of what it has, the inscriptions that it has, and how they can be used pedagogically for our times, for our generation. It can address many questions.
Yeah. So there's the related question then of, you showed us the exquisite craftsmanship, right? And also, Madam also mentioned that. And I think in the book it is mentioned that many of the sculptures still lie in the village headman's house. I don't know whether they're cleaned or whether they're still there. At least I saw them. Wonderful animal sculptures and others, sort of for lack of space, I suppose they just were kept there for safekeeping. Maybe they have been transferred to, I don't know whether the Nalgonda Museum has come up or not. But what does it mean for local craftsmen and people who are invested in doing, craft work? Because, I mean, we are talking about conservation for whom, right? Are we going to talk about our society, or are we going to also, there's this issue, I think it's also been raised in the book. I mean, what does it mean for the developing of local crafts?
This is very important.
Yeah,
I
mean,
feel
we have to do something for the society that
it's a burning question for me. We should learn some lessons of what happened in UP, for instance, with the Kushinagar statue of Buddha Maitreya that was being given. Many state governments in India have become very attracted to the idea that the government of Japan or Hong Kong or the Chinese and the Koreans and the Japanese are giving vast amounts of money for the development and preservation of Buddhist sites, and everyone wants to jump on the bandwagon. And state governments have started receiving huge amounts of money for the management of these sites. Now, what's happening as a result also is that the sites are functioning only for the sake of Buddhist tourists from elsewhere.
Yeah.
And the local population is not invested in the site as a result. It's not their site anymore, it's the cash cow. It's simply a cash cow which is being instrumentalized for the sake. So Buddhists are foreigners. And these sites are for foreigners. And so the narrative of the museums that are getting created at these places are all in English, and in fact with lots of Japanese and Korean handouts that are available at these sites across Bihar and across UP. This is in the most sacred Buddhist sites. This has started happening, and that leads to a certain local alienation. Now, Kushinagar, what happened was that there was a politically motivated protest that took place that went on for over a year, where the people sat in dharna and would not allow the Japanese funds to be utilized for the creation of the big Maitreya statue over there. And they said that it means nothing to us. Why are our lands and our places being taken for the creation of this 100-foot or whatever statue, huge, gigantic statue was planned? They said, give the money back to the government of Japan. You're not building us roads, you're not building us schools, you're not building us hospitals and the things that we need in our district and in our area. And so the appeal was to the politicians and administrators to think about heritage and site museums in an integrated way so that they have local relevance as much for the agriculture and the health and the history of that site, which tells us about how these things were administered, how water management was taken care of in times past, how water management, so that the local population is actually their history is what they are seeing. Okay, 2,000 years ago, this is what the administration was doing.
Yeah, that in fact was my next point about water conservation and water management in many of the viharas. I remember reading a report of the Department of Archaeology and Museums about Totalakunda, right, where there were cisterns on top of the hill of the Vihara, which Lars Fogan has studied and all. But the most important point I want to flag before we open up for the discussion is this whole question, and you mentioned that right in the beginning, that built-in heritage is absolutely dependent on the conservation of natural heritage. So I was wondering, and maybe perhaps I could address that to you, is that whether there can be some collaborative efforts between those who are conserving natural environment, ecology, ecological studies, environmental studies, and then link it up with the question of built-in heritage and conservation of building, because this would mean 2 or 3 departments of the government being, combining, because you can't do this in isolation. And, it is so, we are living through changes that are happening to the foundational basis of Hyderabad as a city and the destruction of its rock. How much ever you may do to save the rocks, the point is just goes out of your... Suddenly somebody will just blow off that granite hill up there, and so goes Phanigiri as well, right? So I think that most imminent is this collaboration. I'm not saying one is more important than the other, but I think that it's like more imminent, isn't it, madam? Is it possible that conservation efforts...
Our very heritage is so laden, so intricately linked between built and natural. Heritage from our built and other artistic traditions. So therefore our approach has to be holistic. But coming to Phanigiri site particularly, because of its nature of being located on a hilltop, and it is all a reclaimed territory from a hilltop, probably it did not have much of natural heritage going with it during its heydays. But now it can be, again it can be explored. For example, there are water cisterns on the hilltop also.
Also near the megalithic.
Yes, on the western side we have 2 and a very clear, pathway for the water to run off, as well as water collection points on the way to the hilltop, as well as at the foothill. So the natural heritage, as far as water is concerned, it is very much present in Phanigiri site. But other aspects of natural heritage, we have to study the site deeply, and then we need to take any interventions that are required. But in an overall setup, in an overall approach, we should have a combined, approach where every conservation activity is well integrated in its natural setting.
Environment. Yeah, the thing about water, and taking up Naman's point, that local communities perhaps are aware of the flow of water into it, because once you go on to the Phanigiri hillside, you obviously see that there are very well watered rice fields for quite a distance, right? And then you see other hills at the distance, which probably is Trimulgiri or Vardhaman Kota and all that. So all around there are water from these hills gathers there. Much later on, you reach the Musi Krishna river basin. That's where a lot of other Buddhist sites now, the current Department of Heritage is like exploring and sending out people. And there are, one must mention that there are a lot of history societies or local history societies that have mushroomed, partly because of the formation of the Telangana state, and partly because of wanting to have know about a Telangana identity in which Buddhism plays a very, very important role. A lot of these private individuals and those interested in things are taking an initiative and doing explorations, and one is in touch with some of them, and then the Department of Heritage excavates potential sites. So it's not that the Department of Heritage has not been doing its job. Currently also it's been doing its job, except that it is so massive a project. So your point about water conservation and the knowledge systems that go into conserving those water systems, I did hear about the former government having invited people to understand the tank irrigation system in Telangana, right? And over here, of course, it's natural water flow and so on and so forth. So maybe we should be also looking at those efforts in collaboration with, you know, the nitty-gritty of...
Yeah, I think that will make it also sort of relevant to the
Socially,
farmer and to the community that lives there. Because if their investment in the material is not there, they will not turn into protectors of the site. There can be no better guide to the site than the people who live in Phanigiri. And so if they have to perform the role of being able to welcome all the Korean and Japanese and Vietnamese and everyone else who are going to come to Phanigiri to see these spectacular sculptures once they come back from New York and now Korea, I think. Yeah, they're now in Seoul. They've gone from the Phanigiri statues. I saw them displayed. I was delighted to see the display in New York. I would like to spend a minute just to mention that. In the big Tree and Serpent exhibition that just concluded at the Metropolitan Museum, the star pieces of the show really were the largest, grandest pieces had gone from Phanigiri. And they had tried to display the Torana gateway, one of the architraves, the largest one, at the kind of height it would actually have been at. Now, I don't know how many tons that...
A lot of engineering went.
Lot of engineering went
in.
And so transporting it first from Phanigiri to New York, that's no joke. Then in displaying it in New York,
It's about 10 feet height?
Yeah, it was at least about 10 feet, if not more. And the architrave is actually about 3/4 of the size of this platform. And it's a cube of stone that big. So it's a single large sculpture, right? And you want to display it at 10 feet horizontally. And you want it to feel like a toran, and it's to continue like a toran. You want to display it, you know, even just the engineering of the design and display of something like this to think about. Now, if somebody has worked on this and they've worked out the data, wouldn't it be wonderful for the Metropolitan Museum to have the opportunity to help the designers in Telangana who are going to be building the museum at Phanigiri to actually give their data and their specialization and all the work that they've done on the engineering, since they've worked it all out, to share that information. If the British Museum has worked out an entire system on the climate control for Amaravati limestone, that they know how best to display it, well, it's then good, no? That we know what is the climate condition that is required in our museum.
And also I had an opportunity to visit their conservation center also. In fact, the conservation center employs more permanent staff than the actual galleries in the Metropolitan Museum. So every small aspect of conservation is taken care, as well as when it goes to display all the anomalies it will be facing, like theft, damage by accidental fall, damage by touch, carbon dioxide. Every smaller, minute detail is taken care at the time of conservation and designing the exhibition itself. So I think this knowledge we can make really good use of while designing a site museum for Phanigiri, because some of the artifacts are very small in size and are very fragile also. They need to be displayed very, very carefully, foreseeing all the probabilities it may have to face.
I don't know. I had heard that they were planning a museum in Nalgonda because there are many Buddhist sites in the region. It's not just Phanigiri, but of course, if there's a site museum, like Kondapur has a site museum, right?
Yes.
And I mean, there have been many seasons of excavation over there in Kondapur, and some of it, of course, is not displayed there, but a large amount of material from Kondapur, even though it's located a little away.
Yeah, again, the problem with Kondapur is that we have not got the final excavation report published yet. So, same with Phanigiri. Though it is excavated for about 12 times the Phanigiri site has been excavated so far.
Right from
1940s, we calculate 12 times, but still the excavation is not completed.
An interim report did come out with pictures of which
I've
Naman
utilized.
showed. Yeah, we should give some credit to the people who were involved in those as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This is
I mean, mean, I think that, this is what you mean by long generations of people who get involved in the site and all. So we have a good 15 minutes with both your permissions. We can open the floor to questions, right? A good 15 minutes, I think, because we started 15 minutes late. So anybody is welcome to...
Yes, there's a question there. Please ask.
Yeah, please. I can't see this. Can this light become less?
She's behind the pillar.
Come, Madhu.
Limestone artifacts or sculptures at that point of time painted. Were they ever painted, any part of them? And I need the meaning for the term terra, it's not terracotta, it's terra cruda. Thank you.
Sculptures which are so terra, it's not baked clay. Technically, it's very similar to stucco, but it's not stucco because stucco has extremely refined plaster, which is used. This is rough inside using dung and hair, horsehair, and other such material, and pebbles and kankad. Pebbles. Yeah. And that's mixed up to make these things, and it's only given a finer layer on top to polish it off. And it's technically a lot of the Indian sculptures which are made and not strictly speaking stucco like the way the European stucco work is done on the ceilings and plastering and all of that. And this should be called terra cruda according to some scholars, more technically speaking. And were these sculptures painted? My reckoning over the years has become that they were...
Enlightening narrative for Phanigiri that you have given, and entwine that to the problem of conservation. That is the most burning thing, of course, is happening now. So what I feel is, instead of tackling these things in silos or, as you said, collaborations and other things, it's just a reflection. What about the school education and an overarching vision for heritage management that can be percolated down to different areas and sectors as well, and making an ecosystem for heritage conservation?
I think on art history, and in which I talked about... ये जरा 2 मिनट रुक जाएंगे कुर्सियों के लिए. It's just distracting me a little. It's just that I think it's about making the art history and heritage relevant to people in their own spaces, translating it all into the languages of the state education board. So the Hindi textbooks and the Telugu textbooks and so on need to be looked at carefully for the same classes to see how they are dealing with visual history and art history as a part of it. I worked with the NCERT textbooks. And so the challenges that I had to come up with was that I couldn't make it locally specific for every CBSE exam board in every district in India, right? And I was tasked with the chapters on Indian temple art and architecture that I had to write. Now, the sky is the limit because every district in India would have its own unique temple. So I had to frame it in a way that forced me to ask the students the teachers to be able to set assignments. What are the temples that you can list in your area? What are the nature of can you make drawings of? How can I get them to start observing what is special about the temples in their own region? But in the chapter, I have given them the general ideas about what happens with temples all over in different parts of South Asia. So then it's up to the class teacher to be able to say, okay, this is the chapter that's telling us what's happening in the rest of South Asia. How do our district's temples compare with the rest of South Asia? And that becomes a way for them to locate themselves and their heritage within a larger whole. And so writing these textbooks and the kind of questions to have with the students, it was very tough. It was also, it required many rounds of editing to really make the questions and the approach to the subject relevant and acceptable. I think we need to be doing much more serious work in this field. It needs to be ongoing.
Right, because historical research the way it is taught. I mean, the History of Peace in Kolkata, run by Seagull Books, has this massive program of training teachers, wherein they actually ask historians to talk about how a historical object or a historical narrative should be read or should be, sort of discussed in the classroom. So I think that on heritage alone, in isolation, would be difficult. I think it has to be a kind of a total project, and that's why I was trying to sort of say that locally make an inclusive project of conservation of heritage, conservation of natural heritage, ecology, and so on, that makes it inclusive in the sense that people would be interested in what is relevant to them in that particular life, sort of harking back to the point. So do we have some more before people would... yes, Richard, please.
Was the translation of, in the historical context for it. We as philologists have talked about the fact that the Buddhists deployed a form of Sanskrit that they have, first of all, and this grammar and vocabulary, phonology of so-called Buddhist hybrid Sanskrit is identified. Is that the nature of that inscription?
In fact, it turns into the Prakrit.
To BHS or pure
No, to
Prakrit?
Prakrit.
Oh.
Right? And so
To Prakrit or Pali?
it's a Prakrit inscription in that is going into this. And I feel that this bilingualism is itself something that we need to talk more about. The bilingualism is important. Because it's trying to tell us about the different registers of patrons that are operating over here. And I think this bilingualism is not unique. It's also happening in many other Buddhist sites where there is a long history of writing multilingual inscriptions, right in Ashoka's inscriptions, etc. So I think this and script, multiple scripts also. So I think this requirement to understand that there is a plural population, there is a diverse population that is living in these places, that these places are not homogeneous. They've never been. There's never been a singular identity of people that has been living there. So the terms at which they have lived and the different classes and different religious groups and communities that have shared space, I think is something we need to understand about these cities.
The second question that particularly the worship of the snake is very potent here.
Yes.
So can you say something about the history of Phanigiri as Phanigiri?
Only. And we do not have any inscriptional evidence for the name.
Achha.
We are, it is as the community addresses it, but nowhere in the inscriptions that name is reflected.
But the mountain itself is almost an inscription. Right?
And
it does look like a snake.
It does look like a snake. That is why we have reasons to believe that it has been in use for long.
Okay,
but I also made one little new suggestion, if for whatever it's worth. The word for turban is Pag relief is something which was of some singular significance inside this shrine, because this stele was actually placed in front of the monastery. And you think about the public role of a statue, when you play the positioning of a statue in. So if I choose something for a roundabout, and you want to put, let's say, a portrait of Gandhi in an important roundabout in the city, it's being thought out that, okay, we want to put Gandhi in this roundabout where everyone will see it as they come into the city. And it's performing a certain role. Or you put Ambedkar in this. So when you position a statue in a site, which is a standalone statue outside the monastery, and the students are coming in and out of that place, and they're reading this statue every day. They're encountering this statue where Siddharth gave away his family money, right? And we have also become monks, and it's reinforcing their resolve as monks who have joined the monastery in Phanigiri. And so this business about the pagdi, as it were. If it is related to it in some way, I wonder. But of course, I think the weight of evidence and popular belief is that it would be related to the Phana, or the serpent hood, is where the name really comes from.
Of course, there are the Pagdi incidents elsewhere as well, not just only at Phanigiri, as you told us.
Yeah.
But Richard, there's a minor point I wanted to talk about. There are what are called these Tamil Brahmi inscriptions, very small, short. Language is Tamil, the script is Brahmi, and when you read the names on these Tamil Brahmi inscriptions all across in Tamil Nadu, Madurai, and all, there are a lot of the Buddhist names, Kassappa, and things like that. So here you have a different kind of conversational thing. The script is understood by the monks that would be traveling around, but the language is Tamil. And there are, of course, Mahalingam has also told, Iraveta Mahadevan has also told us that there were on the rock gravings, there are these Tamil alphabets that are written like children would be writing. So here is a space where the script is of the travelers, but the language is Tamil. Anyway, we have another
Archaeology and Museums where I participated for 5 field seasons at Phanigiri excavation, and now I am CEO at Bleach India Foundation. Then I am supplementing to Sir's question that Sanskrit inscriptions are found first time at Sannati, is a pure Sanskrit inscription of 1st century AD, Shatakarnika. Then second one comes from Chebrolu in Guntur district, that is 207 CE of Vijay Shatakarni, pure Sanskrit. Then Abhira Vasusayana's Sanskrit inscription at Nagarjanakonda, followed by Phanigiri. The whole, we call it as Phanigiri Dharmachakra Prasasti Shasana. What a wonderful inscription, mellifluous verses. Even Kalidasa could have stunned looking at the language that it went into making that wonderful inscription. Then I also say that the last part, the 3 or 4 lines is in Prakrit, the local Prakrit. If you go back to Tumalagudu inscription of Vikramendra Bhattaraka Varma of the Vishnu Kundins, it is a trilingual. It begins with Sanskrit. In between, it has Telugu words like Kapu, Dalva, Kuduru, Kadu, all are Telugu words. After that, it again ends with Prakrit. So, hybrid form of inscriptions are there. That I am just giving an information. Apart from that, I would also like to say, name of Phanigiri. When I was part of the excavation team, Veeranaran Reddy Garu asked me, Phanigiri, it is a Sanskritized version. Since it is a Buddhist site, can you please find out from the locals what they now call? And when I asked some of the people, they said that Padiga Konda. Padiga is hood, serpent hood. Konda is hill. Like that, there are certain basic local nomenclatures which they call as Padiga Konda. Padiga Konda is Phanigiri, is Sanskritized. Like Penugonda is Ghanagiri bolke Sanskrit kara diye. So there are certain occurrences, and that is, apart from that one, I would like to appreciate you for selecting that unique turban item for your article, and it is what you call is masterpiece of the entire book. I congratulate you, sir. I also thank ma'am for initiating, Visalatchi ma'am, for initiating such a wonderful endeavor. Otherwise, it could have not seen
It would
the
never
day
have
of
happened.
light.
That is true. Yes.
And I hope the present incumbents will follow the suit. Thank you.
In dealing with crafts in Crafts Council, how do you suggest we contribute or start looking at what can be from ancient times who have been sculpting, and is there any local crafts found there, or is there any possibility of our entering into, say, design intervention or something? Because we are looking, as Naman had said, that we are looking also at the people around who live. Can we make a difference in their livelihoods or anything? I'm quite confused.
I think it can be
so
done.
I'd like to ask you and Dr. Visalatchi what they would suggest.
Nearby. Similarly, we can actually take these relevant motifs from Phanigiri and introduce in our local tradition. That is one way of popularizing it, because in Dharmavaram silk, every motif is, coming from the local temples. Lepakshi, particularly that elephant and the peacock motifs are from swan, is all from Lepakshi temple. Similarly, we have beautiful motifs coming out of the sculptures in Phanigiri. So we can motivate the the ikat weavers to take these motifs and introduce it as Phanigiri motifs. That will popularize it immediately, the site as well as its art history.
To open our horizons to thinking about a museum space and a conservation space in a much bigger way. Once we start talking about heritage and history and issues, we are actually dealing with the communities of farmers and craftspeople, the weavers, etc. Their social history. They're not just making things only for the tourist trade and for the cities. We go back to being able to think about what the original defining parameters for the Khadi Gramodyog and Khadi Commission were, which were to be able to make things that were as much for their own and local consumption as much as it was for sharing it with the city and with making it available through. So if the material if the museum becomes a space not just for the conservation of the sculpture, but also for the documentation and the drawing and the writing of these things, then it becomes a very active space that the community itself uses. Like, I want to know how many crafts museums are created for crafts people. I think the Delhi Crafts Museum, when Charles Correa and Jyotendra Jain designed it originally, was designed not just as a museum for the people of Delhi to come and see, but it was designed as a museum for the craftspeople themselves to be able to come and look at the catalogue of textiles and motifs, that they themselves could see, okay, our grandparents, these are their sketchbooks, this is what our family tradition was, this is where it becomes for their use, along with a space for them to take residence over there and work and sell for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, when they would come and occupy that space and work. Now that actually means that for them it's a learning. They're using the galleries not merely as the Delhiites who come to use the galleries, but they themselves are using the galleries and then are also making work in response to that. Now that is something that we really need to bring back, I think. That was something very progressive in the way that it was thought through.
I was, before this lecture, talking to Anjane Reddy Garu, and he introduced me to a generational sculptor. I don't know whether, Harshavardhan, whether he's here, generations and generations, and he has sculpted for the Buddhavanam project. And there are many such youngsters who continue to carry on their traditional crafts. So we've finished our 15 minutes, and I think that we should wind up because everybody's tummies are rumbling. And I thank everybody for their participation, and in particular thank both the panelists for engaging with the audience and with engaging with all of us. And thank you again once
Thank
again.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Naman, Dr. Visalatchi ji and Aloka. Just can't tell you how much we've enjoyed this morning's talk. Just looking forward to it. Thank you ever so much. And we look forward to taking this forward in a different way, maybe getting inputs from you all. So now I'll have the pleasant task of asking Nandini, our Vice Chairperson, to honor our guests. Richard Cohen also to come. We would like to honor you with a small gift. Today has been a memorable morning, taking all of us into a journey to the Buddhist land at Phanigiri, which came alive through the scholarly exposition of Dr Naman Ahuja, likewise the discussion with Dr Visalatchi and Dr Aloka. Thank you all so much. Art has to be felt and experienced from the heart. This important element came through so well in these 2 hours. Study of art history and architecture helps us to understand and appreciate our culture and heritage with a deeper understanding. I thank Dr. Richard Cohen, a scholar and Indologist from the University of Virginia, US, to have graced this event. Unfortunately, Paparao Garu said he will come, but he's been, not been able to come. But where is he? Oh, thank you so much for coming. And even though you wrote saying that you may not be able to, we owe him a lot because everybody who knows about Phanigiri knows how much he has contributed to it, right? Thank you so much. We have amongst us Sri Anjaneya Reddy Garu also, project many years ago when N.T. Ramarao was our Chief Minister, that started the whole thing in Hyderabad, the monolithic statue of Buddha and the beautiful temple that he has built of Buddha in Mahendra Hills. I believe it is. I have been there once, but it's very well appreciated. And he has done many other projects, and we owe him a lot for it. Thank you so much for coming and gracing the event today. And Dr. Kirtana Tangavelu, an old friend going back several years, I thank her for helping us to get on board along with the Fine Arts Department, SN School, celebrating the University of Hyderabad Golden Jubilee. Thank you for this encouragement and collaborating with us so much, Kirtana. We hope to do much more with University of Hyderabad. The Marg team, Manasi, for going back and forth, engaging with us on emails about the programs and things like that. Sorry for this bad throat. Our own social media team of Anita, Aditi, Arjun, I thank them for coming up with beautiful poster, teaching me patiently the ways of the social media game. I'm totally unaware of it, and I have a lot to learn. Last but not the least, I thank our chairperson, Anuradha Bishnoi, Secretary Hemlata Khemka, who could not be here today, but I thank them for the encouragement and all the best wishes they have sent today. Subcommittee at Resource Center and Executive Committee members for all the encouragement to hold this talk today. I thank our office staff, Anuradha, Philomena, Kishore, Bhaskar, and Raju, for all the help so willingly given and to organize this event. In this list, if I have overlooked anyone's name, please do forgive me. Thank you all once again, and please join us for lunch on the 4th floor. We look forward to having you for. I hope you'll enjoy the lunch.